You're listening to the One-on-One Football Podcast, the number one podcast for Aussie Rules training, coaching and development tips. Welcome to the One-on-One Football Podcast. My name's Harry Symington, and as always, I'm joined in the virtual studio by the founder of One-on-One Football and my former coach, Andrew Rains. How are you, Rainsy?
Going well, Simo. Actually over in the west at the moment, just visiting some family here on my wife's side, so... The best thing about our virtual world now, mate, you can record and set up anywhere. So, looking forward to this episode, mate, and obviously having a chat with you.
Yeah, for sure. And today's topic we're going to cover off on pre-season and off-season as well, but mainly that pre-season sort of the back end of Christmas leading into round one. And we're going to pick Rainsy's brains a little bit today on some of his experiences as a player and as a coach, and how you can, I guess, maximize that period, whether you are a player and you're looking to develop your game, or if you're a coach and you might be looking for more buy-in from your players. So Rainsy, I'll kick it off by asking, what were some of your best and worst pre-season memories as a player?
Got quite a few, mate. So just talking off air before about some of the things that have sort of been in my career, and obviously as a player and a coach, as you said before, and the pre-seasons that come with that. It's always an interesting time. But one of the big things about pre-season, I've talked to a lot of my former teammates about this, is that it's actually a great time of year. It's summer usually, or it's the start of it's usually sometimes spring, but usually it's throughout the summer. You're fit, you got a tan, sun's out, or if you're in Queensland, sometimes it's a rainy season, but it's hot, it's warm, and it's a fresh sort of feel in the year. Everyone's looking forward to the year, and you're in really good nick. You can get a lot of miles in your legs, you can get a lot of gains in the gym, things like that, which we'll cover off on. But that was the big one for sort of me. It was a fresh start. It's not until you sort of get to around sort of February, March, you call it sort of dancing with your sister a bit. You sort of get sick of playing the intra-clubs games and match them against each other, and you just want to get out there and play. Yeah. So it's got a really good start and a feel through that middle sort of period of pre-season, and everyone's up and about and feeling good. So my sort of memories of pre-seasons are usually fairly fond. Obviously the hard work, the miles you put, and the gains you get out of it is incredible. Some amazing trips. I went over to Arizona and did the altitude training at the Lions over there, the high altitude training in northern Arizona, and that we did that sort of for 2 or 3 years, which is an incredible experience in itself, and I'll probably delve a bit more into that. But and also too some early days at some old school sort of activities or exercises in running at Richmond we used to get up to too. So it was some incredible experiences, some hard work, blood, sweat and tears at the time. You sort of dread some of the time trials or the exercises or things that you're doing, but you look back at it and think it sets you up not only as a footballer but as a person too, to push through and to realise a bit of a self achievement at the end of it.
Yeah, I like your take on it. I guess the way I think of pre-season, it's like a fork in the road. You can either take the mentality of, it's going to be hard, it's going to be a grind, the training sessions are unpleasant. But if you look at it as also an opportunity to develop yourself, then, pre-season, off-season is a great thing. And as you mentioned with some of your experiences, if you look back on your pre-seasons and you've got fond memories of and a feeling of there's an opportunity here, especially when, your competition might be sort of relaxing or not doing the same amount of work as you are, then you can look at it really fondly. Or I can you sort of either choose one mindset, it's an opportunity to develop, or here we go, it's another pre-season.
Absolutely. I think also too, is personally speaking, I don't know a lot of other footballers and even coaches for that example, around the pre-season, the most successful ones you've had, or the most compliant in terms of amount of sessions you're getting over the summer, are the most successful years that you have, and that's, I've got no doubt about that. And that sort of, for me as a player, was huge. If I had a pretty good pre-season or a big pre-season, likely I'd go on a pretty good year. If I didn't, I had some injury interruptions. I didn't miss too many pre-seasons, but the ones that I did, I remember when I first got to Brisbane and I was coming off a pretty significant knee surgery, and I had 12 weeks off completely running as soon as I got to Brisbane. And it was a new team, new teammates, new environment, and I couldn't really get up and running until March. And it really did sort of cost me at the back end of that year. Had a reasonable start to the year, but the back end cost me. Just didn't have the miles in the legs, and there's reasons why we do pre-seasons.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess stringing pre-seasons together is no doubt important as well. You probably can't go from not doing, if you're a junior footballer, you can't go from doing no preseason, to doing an AFL preseason, I guess. Did you ever try and do too much in one preseason and look back and think, hang on, I could have been smarter about how I trained and focused instead of doing it all in one preseason on sort of distributing that workload and, as you said, the kilometers in your legs?
Yeah, but probably not to my own fault. I think it was, again, not blaming others, but it was just the way it happened. At Richmond, when I first got there as a 17, 18-year-old, I was nowhere near ready for a full preseason. My first ever AFL preseason session was down at Sandringham. Back then at Richmond, we couldn't train at Punt Road because of the cricket pitch. And I rock up as a young sort of Gold Coast boy, man, and get given the apparel. You jump on, you meet your teammates, go out, do your first skills session, and then the back end was old school, was always do your skills and then running at the back end. And it was I think it was 800s, and then Wayne Campbell, who was my former captain of the Tigers, Wayne, someone hit one of the markers or the cones set up, and he said at the time, I think Brisbane came off their third premiership or second premiership, and he said, would Simon Black or Michael Voss hit that cone, or Nigel Lappin? And the boy said no. And he said, well, we did it, and it's not good enough. If it's good enough for them, then we should not be doing it. So we did another 800. Never forget. It was about, I think it was around sort of 800s. It was just crazy. I don't know the exact time we're running them on or reps and things like that. In terms of every sort of, it was off every 3 or 4 minutes we're doing it, but it was brutal, and that was my first pre-season. And not only that, first pre-season session. Then not only that, we went to a boxing session straight afterwards back at the club for the first year players. So they were trying to get actually more into our first year players than some of the older boys. But it's sort of, I noticed it was really interesting. Then noticed obviously towards the middle part of my career now, back end and now coaching it, the first years get pretty well looked after. They're trying to really take care of them and nurse them through. So I did a full pre-season, my first pre-season at Richmond, and did probably more than the senior players. But I found that cost me in my second pre-season. I think I got significant groin pain in my second season. It was bordering on osteitis pubis, what they call is the inflammation of the pubic bone and the groin. Yep. So I was able not to get affected as much as some people that do get OP, but it definitely did affect me in my second year. And I reckon that was probably going a bit too hard in that first year. So again, no fault of anyone's, it's just the way they did it. But that was sort of a significant sort of moment of me going, okay, well, how do we manage that moving forward, making sure I'm not doing too much. But conversely, remember when I was 24, 25 at Brisbane, and I could actually go and have an off season and get some gains in the off season, knowing that I had 5, 6 pre-seasons under my belt, and I could able to cope with the rigorous conditioning sessions of a pre-season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's you've got to look at it from an individual perspective. There's going to be some players that, especially around that draft age, there's going to be some players that mature earlier and can probably handle more, and trying to hold them back is probably detrimental in the long run. Whereas there's going to be other players that probably do need that 2-3 pre-seasons before they can start really ramping it up. I think Jamari Ugelhagen's probably a good example of that. We know what he's going to be like in the future, and the Doggies probably could have tried to rush to get him to play this year. But I think for a player of his stature, and everyone's got a different growth rate, it's probably a wise decision to sort of let him build his pre-seasons as he naturally will. Now, mate, we talk about running load and load in the gym, and it's associated with pre-season and off-season all the time. But why is it also important to keep your skills going in the pre-season, particularly like your kicking load, for example?
Yeah, it's a big one. And coaches pull their hair out when a player comes back for the first session after a break and pings their quad. I've seen them many a time. And it's usually the guys that haven't done the work or the kicking. So it's really important you do in the off-season have a football with you and try and get that kicking load in. what happens, again, I'm no a sports scientist, mate, and you probably know a bit more than me around the sort of conditioning element, but from layman's terms is that, you have less kicks in your quads, and you go away from not doing as many as you used to, and then you ramp up and have 50 kicks your first session back, or 100 kicks, and you've only been used to having sort of 5 to 10 or none at all for a couple of weeks, and obviously you put a huge load on your quads, and usually get a bit of a ping, and it obviously sets players back. Quads are never good injuries to have. No injuries great, but they're a really important muscle to your body, and you can't kick or you can't run for a couple of weeks. Obviously, it's going to set you back. So I've seen that happen many times. So it's important to obviously go away in the off season, and obviously during the pre-season when you've got little breaks to keep your kicking load going, because obviously it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I reckon it's it's always the spikes in load that I guess the tissue can't handle. So just because you can handle, let's say it's 200 kicks a week in season, if you then drop that down to 0 for a month over Christmas and then try and go straight back into 200 again, well, then there's a huge spike. And that's where the problems occur, right? But if you can just maintain, let's say it's 50 kicks a week over Christmas, then the spike's going to be smaller. And especially if you're smart with how you reload it as well, you don't go straight from 50 to 200. You go 50 this week, next week's going to be 100. And you make it a gradual increase again. Then you're avoiding the spikes. And I reckon it's probably more important to maintain some level of kicking than it is to, I guess, rest from it as well. It probably goes twofold.
Absolutely, and I think the other one's just your dedication towards it, especially if you're going away, and everyone understands if you go on holidays or whatever and you're with your family, or you can't quite get your usual training set up with teammates and have a kick. Actually, we've got some pretty good stuff in our online programs where you actually can do some stuff on your own. So check those out if you're looking to sort of get some exercise and some drills on your own, especially when you're travelling. Other one too is packing your footy everywhere you go, so deflate on the plane. I think some of the Sharons these days do have capability to just keep them pumped up in your suitcase, but I used to sort of deflate a footy, take a little mobile pump with me. I used to take that everywhere, even overseas trips. I remember one year in coming back from, it was my knee injury, and I was travelling in Paris with my wife, my girlfriend back then, but and I said, can you come down and kick with me? I need to get my quads, keep them going, especially all the injuries that I had. I wanted to make sure that my quads were right when I head back. So we went down to a park in Paris somewhere, and I'll never forget it. I left the footy. I think I had a kick, kicking myself, kicked a bit with her, and then I left the footy as a marker to finish off my running. And I remember looking, it might have been 100 metres, the markers that I set out, 100 steps, and I was back up one end and the footy was down the other end, and this French person was in the park walking their dog, and they've looked at the footy, seemed the most bizarre looking thing. They thought they didn't know to go too close or away from it. They'd never seen anything like it. Obviously it was a weird shaped football from what they're used to seeing, and a leather one at that, and I had to sort of run down the other end and explain it was an Australian football. So there's some of the things and the measures you go to as an elite athlete to keep yourself conditioned in good nick.
That's gold. How's Elisa's kicking technique?
She's not bad. She reckons she's ambidextrous, so it'd be interesting to sort of see if she's on Acker's level, left and right foot, because she didn't know what leg she kicked off, and she was actually not too bad. Bit of feedback on the drop punch. She tends to go, instead of the back spin, she goes the forward spin a bit, but not too bad. Yep.
That's right, mate. A couple of ball drop drills and she'll be right. We've got plenty of them on exactly. The online programs as well. We'll put the link in the show notes. Now, you're talking about the Christmas break, Ramsey, and the off-season break over Christmas, obviously. And you went to France 1 year, but if you're not, let's say you're not overseas, what were some of your go-to activities to take your mind off footy during that break?
Yeah, really important. Again, probably I'll answer your question shortly, but just into that doing your work, it's obviously important. Even if you are having a bit of a freshen up, do your work. I used to always, and stress my players as a coach too now, is to do your work early in the morning. So if you get up and do your program, whatever you got, do that first thing in the morning, because then you've got the rest of the day to enjoy yourself. I've been there before. you ended up either not doing it all, or you do it to not the quite right intensity that you plan to do it, as if you do it in the afternoon or late in the evening, especially when especially around Christmas time when you're enjoying time with family and friends. But to answer your questions, I used to try and, just do have a hit of golf, surf, whatever it is, to sort of keep your mind fresh and do those activities that you like to do during the season, but you probably just don't have the time. So making sure you're cashing in on that and just staying fresh. I know a lot of the boys these days like basketball and hit a tennis or whatever it is, just to keep yourself sort of going and sort of immerse yourself in those different sports, obviously without getting injured. But I think it is important too to sort of freshen up the mind and play some other sports too along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I like that advice as well on all the different things you mentioned. We're still staying active. Like, I don't think you want to necessarily go and become housebound. Footy players by nature are probably going to be more active, but if your normal activity is playing footy, then you don't have to keep that going. You might be able to, like you say, go surfing, play golf or something, and you're keeping active. That's enough to, I guess, tick that box. But I like what you said about the morning routine. I think if you want the license to sort of from yourself, so a bit of a self-license to really enjoy yourself over the break, it doesn't hurt to put in some hours early. And the odds are that that's going to be the same sort of routine when you get back to the club in an AFL system anyway. You're going to have to get back into an early morning routine. For those that aren't familiar with an AFL, a typical week in an AFL preseason, how early do they start? What are those first 2 weeks, I guess, look like coming back after Christmas?
It's sort of obviously I think most clubs now do 3 main sessions a week, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Used to do a Saturday morning running session when I first started, so they just top you up more. It's just, you look back at it, and obviously I think now is more is less, or less is more, whatever the saying. Yep. Yeah, less is more. But back then it used to be sort of more. But I think the AFL Players Association stepped in and ensured the players had their sort of weekends off, or if they did train on a Saturday, then they'd have a Wednesday off or a Thursday off or whatever. So usually 3 main sessions, footy and conditioning, and then there's those 2 days, whether it's, let's say it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Tuesday, Thursday would be weights, cross-training, meetings, things like that. So they're pretty jam-packed, and that's sort of how their sort of pre-season schedule is sort of set up. It changes a bit after Christmas. They go into more, match sim and things like that, and it's similar. So the running probably just drops off a bit. They're so fit these days, the players. They're so professional. They do actually a lot of it in their off-season. They're running and things like that. So when they get back, they actually want to attack more of the footies, where, again, a bit old school, but coming back, again, I was probably the back end of it, but coming back pre-Christmas, you wouldn't touch many footies. You'd touch them, but it was more footballs post-Christmas, which is obvious. But I think now it's as soon as you're back in sort of that November period that the footies are straight out. They usually get a couple 2 to 3 week break over Christmas and then attack it sort of mid-January, get back into it. And then before you know it, it's practice games around the corner. So it does, even though they do sound long, the pre-seasons, they come around pretty quick in terms of the season comes around pretty quick. But I think the players get a really good break these days, and I think they should. But again, some of my memories early days at Richmond, I was starting to come back sort of mid-October, the first to 4 year players, mid to late October, which was crazy thinking back on it, and you don't play till sort of, mid-Feb practice games or March, so that's a long summer. But again, at the same time too, is you're fit and you're young and you want to keep training, so it's all part. I remember one pre-season in Richmond too, they got us actually back, so you get your 8 week break, 2 months off, and they get us back on week 4, week 5 for a Botanical Gardens test, the tan time trial, the infamous tan time trial, and a Skinfold Test. And I think, the players push hard for the clubs not to be able to do that. They're trying to keep tabs on the players. So, again, I think there's a lot more trust in the players these days, and it's a tiny bit... It's probably more intense pre-season in terms of their football load, because as we know now, that the game's just so intense and frenetic, the way they go about it, but it's probably less in terms of months. If that sort of answers the question, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about that post-Christmas block shortly. But before we do that, you mentioned the tan run and the skin folds. The skin folds have been taken out of the draft combine, I think. I saw that a couple of weeks ago. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, it's a mix that one. I think it is a good sort of benchmark to have, and sort of see where you can sort of pick up anything on a player's sort of body composition to improve, and it's good to have a bit of a sort of a guideline. But again, we used to stress ourselves out. Ask my wife about it, and my family or whatever. You're pinching yourself at Christmas time, worrying how much Christmas pudding you're having because you think you're gonna put on the extra kilos or some skin. Skinfold, I was pretty fortunate. I probably wasn't a Ben Cousins of the world or some of the players I played with that it just they could eat anything and they're still ripped. But at the same time too is I sort of did. I could sort of eat a fair bit and drink a bit and not sort of put on too much, but you always were a bit paranoid around that. So from the psychological point of view, I think they're not great because they do put a lot of pressure on. Because if your skin folds are 5 millimeters over, but you're running good time trials and things like that, I had a good teammate of mine, Jolly Patfull, who I hope he doesn't mind me saying that he was probably always on the mid to high side of the skin folds. Yep. And he used to stress himself out about it and try and get him down. But he'd be our best runner, probably a top 3 runner, and then he won, sort of 2 back-to-back best and fairest at Brisbane the years that I was playing with him, and he used to stress himself out about having high skin folds. And so there's an example. I think that we can take it a bit too sort of serious, but I think they're okay in periods where you can sort of get them out and give the players a bit of a test.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's DEXA scans and whatnot these days as well. They're going to probably give more accurate data on muscle mass and fat mass and the distribution of that as well. But like you said, it's probably a good opportunity to shift the focus. If you're spending your whole preseason worrying about your skin folds, that's an opportunity that you could be worrying about or working towards your skills or your fitness or something. And if your diet's good and your training habits are elite, I think the skin folds are probably something that take a back seat in that sense.
I agree.
You've got some excellent players that might naturally have higher skin folds, but they've got strengths in other areas. In saying that, professional athletes, you expect a certain level of engagement nutritionally. But I think you're exactly right. There's probably other ways that we can achieve those goals. Just to backtrack a little bit, so you're talking about the pre-Christmas block of off-season being more you're loading your legs, you're gut running, all the sessions that we typically hate, and then post-Christmas it was more match simulation. I guess you can do all the kicking you want separately, all the straight line running you want separately. You can get as fit and as strong as you want in the gym, out on the track, but then when you make that jump from training, let's say, into match play where you're doing contested drills, you're hitting bodies, you're changing direction, you're responding to players and a really chaotic environment. How can you, I guess, prepare for that first match simulation session to ensure that you're not in your panic zone when you go straight from running by yourself over Christmas with your headphones in to match simulation?
Well, it's a hard one to simulate anything in that Christmas sort of period when you're probably on your own and you're not doing as much with your teammates. But it's probably that pre-Christmas period, I think, where the players are onto it now, and they actually do some drills straight out. Like I was looking the other day at the Suns, and they were doing some pretty good, sort of intense drills early in pre-season. Sort of like, geez, that's early to be doing that. But there's a reason why. I think what you're alluding to too, it's conditioning, and not only now. I think again the old school mentality, but conditioning yourself in the gym, conditioning yourself with your skills, and conditioning yourself with your running. I think there's an element of conditioning yourself for body contact. And again, they're always thinking about it, but it's just a lot early these days. So, in answer to your question, I think getting it in as early as you can. So coaches take note of that. It's a really important one. Again, it's a fine line. You don't want to get them back day one, and especially with community level clubs or junior clubs, or even senior community clubs that are sort of not full time athletes. To build into it, do a bit more running first and their kicking and things like that, just getting their body back into shape. But I'll probably just tack on a couple of little sort of contested drills just to get their bodies into it. Whether it's just a basic sort of tackle drill where you're just grappling or you're just starting to get some body contact, then the next week you sort of spread that out a bit more and you go two on two tackling drill, and then you might go 4 on 5 or whatever it is, and you build your way to that. Before you know it, you're sort of doing handball gains with a bit of tackling, and then you can start to sort of build that into your kicking, sort of keepings off sort of gains with some contact, and then before you know it, you're doing some match sim.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's also important to make sure that you get used to kicking from a skills perspective, getting used to actually kicking to players, not just kicking to a pole or kicking to a marker that you've set up. It's obviously important to do your craft in your own time and build that base, but there's a linking stage that sometimes gets overlooked where you're marking a footy that you're kicking up yourself. Do you reckon it's worth? So obviously here at the platform we've got coaches that can help with that, but maybe small group sessions with a coach could be a nice way to sort of fill that gap where you go from training by yourself or headphones in doing your own work but before you reach match sim. Find some mates, source a coach, and try and do like a small group session maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's that sort of, we always talk about it, don't we? Just time to be able to spend as an individual footballer, and then there's time to be spent as a team footballer and to sort of simulate that type of environment. So I think that's really important.
I think there's, it's not like one is better than the other, but it's important to be smart about what type of drills you're implementing when. There's probably a time and place for everything. Talking about the focus of those drills. So we speak a lot on the podcast. It's a real common theme that it's important to work on your strengths as well as your weaknesses. Could you just elaborate on that for the listeners, Rainsy, on where their focus should be? Is it you start with your strengths, then work your weaknesses? Do you do them all the time, every session? Do you sit down and come up with a development plan? What would your advice be to someone about to go into preseason, wanting to know where they should direct their focus?
Yeah, well, definitely, obviously reassessing the year they've had, and then moving on to the year ahead. And obviously, we talk a fair bit about those goals and actioning them, and actually having a proper outcome along the way. I think that pre-season you've got a lot of time and more time, because there's something about pre-season that it's as hard. It feels like it's mentally harder than. Sorry, it feels like it's physically harder than the season, but in reality, it's probably not, because you add the mental fatigue in during the season with the stress of playing and backing it up week in, week out, things like that. So you're a tiny bit, sort of a double-edged sword a bit, but you're a tiny bit fresher, or you're more time. You've got more time to do those extras in the pre-season. I think the biggest gains are made, there's no question about it. The biggest gains are made in the pre-season, because in season you're constantly recovering and ticking over. You ask any footballer, coach, whatever, you're doing less sessions in the pre-season. You're doing less sessions in the season than you are in the pre-season. So my answer to that is focus on your weapons, definitely. So if it's your kicking or your skills, and that's what you think is, keep attacking and doing more on your opposite, whatever it is, to keep that going, keep on top of that. But then invest into your areas for improvement in your deficiencies, because I think you can get a lot more gains from that in the pre-season. So again, let's use kicking. Let's say this time it's your weakness. I guarantee if you did more sessions kicking in the summer months over someone picks you up in the season in the middle of winter in June and go, you got to work on your kicking. Well, you can get better at it, and you can focus on it, but you're obviously going to have less time to work on it. So that's probably my sort of advice about the importance of pre-season, how you can just get huge gains through that period, because again, you've got no weekend games. You're pulling up better on a Monday. You can get more into your body. And I think it's huge opportunity for players to reap the rewards in the pre-season.
Yeah, it's a real growth period, isn't it? There's less dilution on training sessions. There's less restrictions on. Obviously, you don't have to get, as you mentioned, you have to get fresh for a game. So you probably got a chance to sort of go a little bit deeper in the well. You mentioned that you'd sort of start by reflecting on the year that you had. And sort of let that be not a catalyst, but I guess help decide what you're going to structure your preseason around. Did you during your AFL career? Did you have someone that you would regularly sit down with and discuss maybe have an end of year meeting? Were there any coaches that you were particularly close with that you would review the year with and then come up with a plan?
Usually your line coach at each club, again, without sort of mentioning too many names, but the line coach, obviously senior coach, which you look up most up to. I know early years with Terry Wallace, he actually said to me one pre-season, it was my second year as a 19-year-old, and Terry said to me, I don't know if we've covered this on the podcast before in my earlier interviews, but he said to me, you're elite, you're not elite at AFL level. I was only 19, but he's obviously putting the heat on me to get a sort of a spot. And he said to me, you're not elite at AFL level in any area. And the 4 main areas, I think, were speed, endurance, skills, and toughness. So I went away and I said, well, how can I get a lead in some areas? And my speed was pretty good as a junior athlete, sort of coming through. But then I did some sprint training, got better at that, got my times, and that pre-season really worked on that. Became sort of top 5 we had a speed test back then. Not as quick as our good mate Brett Delidio, but not too far off him. No, he always had me covered. And then my endurance picked up. Again, I was sort of middle to back as a young fella, and then I pushed up to sort of mid to front. And then my skills, sort of put a lot of work in my kicking and decision making. And then my courage and toughness was something I really pride myself on. And I remember having a discussion, I had my breakout year the next year, and he said, out of those sort of 4 categories, he said you've pretty much ticked sort of three out of 4 of them in that elite category, and that's hence why you've had the year you had. So that's probably a really a story or a mentor or a coach that sort of hits home. And he didn't beat around the bush and sort of challenged me in those areas, and I sort of took it on board and went and did it. So that's the time to do it. It was sort of the off-season meeting going to that pre-season. I remember it was one of the biggest sort of pre-seasons I had, and hence the breakout year I had in 2006, a long time ago now.
Yeah, for sure. And did you? So you had maybe 4 areas, was it? 4 areas?
4 areas sort of focus on. There's obviously more. I think we go through IDPs I've done with you before these days, individual development plans. It's 5 key categories to be an AFL player or where you sort of got to be. And it's skills, decision making, like skills, tactical, technical. So split into 2.
Yep.
That's around your game sense and things like that. Then obviously your physical stuff. And then your mental stuff, which sort of covers off. So 4 or 5 key areas, and that's sort of the discussions I had.
Yeah, and we've got a great template on player development plans that Josh Fraser presented at the Footy IQ online masterclass. So if you're interested in having a look at what what one of those documents might look at, jump on our website, click on the eShop, and you'll be able to find it up there. So just before we move on, Rains, you mentioned that you had 4 categories that you wanted to work on, and by the end of that season, you had 3 that you drastically improved. Was that a process of take it one at a time and segment? I want to do my kicking this month. Next month's going to be toughness, or did you focus on, I guess, a more holistic approach where you did bits of everything at the same time? Yeah,
well, it's probably bits of everything at the same time. I think the 3, I probably just have I done my speed that session. Yeah, I've done that. Or that, like if you break it down to a week, I've done my speed, ticked that off. I've done my skills. Toughness is a hard measure to sort of to have, or your courage or toughness of that category, mental toughness. But obviously you're grinding yourself through the pre-season, so you're building on that, and then obviously the endurance element or sort of physicality. So I'll tick most of them off each week.
Yeah, awesome. And so you mentioned earlier some of the experiences that you had in pre-season coming from a draftee into the AFL system. Obviously, you had a long career in the system across different clubs. What are some of your most vivid memories of anything to do with pre-season, sort of after that initial draft year?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the 800s. They probably go down as one of the hardest sessions we had. And it actually was a double whammy that day. I spoke about going back to the club and doing boxing. My good mate of mine and fellow draftee, Tom Roach, at the time there was a 2:00 session after the 800s. We got back at Punt Road. It was a 2:00 boxing session. And as you do when you're young, you just don't realise the importance of time or punctuality. I think we're 1 minute to 2 or right on 2:00. We walked through the gym and all the older blokes are staring at us going, oh shit, they're late. And I'll never forget it. We had punishment and we had 10 rounds. I think it was 10 to 1.5, 90-second rounds where we had to just protect ourselves and the senior players were laying into us. Don't know if that had happened these days, but that was the most sort of daunting session I have had. So that was a double whammy that day. Never forget that.
Just a brawl.
Yeah,
punishment.
Pretty much. Just got punished. There were some brutal running sessions in Arizona, the altitude camp that I was sort of speaking about before. That was
Yep.
some of the best memories of my football were done over there. In terms of, I got to a point where I was nearly sort of 8 to 10 pre-seasons in, and I needed the mental freshen up. I was sort of getting to November, December as the same sort of thing. Where a young bloke, could be at the club every day, and you sort of don't get sick of it. You don't get, probably not the word for it, but it's sort of more mental freshen up. And going overseas to train was just incredible. It's a great idea and great concept by the AFL or the club at the time at Brisbane. So that
was a club trip?
Yeah, club trip. But the early days of that, I think Collingwood they pioneered it. And
Yep.
And then I think the Lions sort of go, okay, what's this all about? We'll send 8 to 10 of our senior players over. So I think we went, it might have been a bit more, maybe 12 to 14 of the sort of older brigade, and I was sort of that mid to sort of older tier. And we went and it was incredible.
Yep.
And then the next year the whole club came, which was really good. But I'll just remember some of the running. So at the same time, most incredible experience, and it was really good to freshen me up and get so fit. But some of the hardest, most brutal sessions. And my running at the time was pretty good. I was probably in the top sort of echelon for the running group. And there's one day, I don't know what happened, and we laugh about it. It was I nearly couldn't complete it was back-to-back these rolling 300s. So it was essentially 300 sprint, 100 jog, 50 walk, or whatever, and you're back to the start, and you go through and just keep doing it. And it was monotonous, tough, but there's something about the lactate in the lactic acid with the altitude. I just remember something, whether I didn't have enough hydration that morning or whatever, and I nearly fainted. I had to go to the back running group with the slow blokes, and a few of the boys were laughing at the time, saying something must have been in the air that morning, because I remember that sort of hit me pretty hard, and that was probably one of the most grueling sessions I've ever done. Just the altitude hit me, and I'll never forget that.
Yeah, for sure. I guess there's a wide world out there. I mean, obviously with COVID, the travel is restricted, but there's a wide world of resources and other sports and other teams and other countries that you can probably learn off. Whether it's physical, like altitude training, or mental. You see the Hawthorn Footy Club. I was a Hawks fan growing up. Always have the Kokoda trip, where I think everyone on their list for a few years completed the Kokoda Trail in the preseason, and like that was built around their probably group bonding, but also a bit of mental toughness individually as well. I reckon looking for an opportunity there to, it doesn't have, if you can't travel overseas, you might be on a family trip visiting relatives in another state. Like it's an opportunity to try and reach out and maybe train with someone or at a facility that you might not have had access to before. I know on the platform we've got some excellent coaches all around the country, but we've probably got a higher density down in Melbourne. If you're in a trip in Melbourne, maybe connect with one of those coaches and have a session with someone that you probably can't during the week.
I think changing the environment's the critical thing, there, just to be able to change it up and mentally stimulate you, but also mentally sort of freshen you up. And, I think, as you said before, there's been many things that clubs have done. I know exactly, speaking about the altitude camps, we also did those SAS type of camps too, and they were just most incredible thing I've ever done too, and the hardest thing I've done too. So it's at the same time too, challenge and reward. So think of ways to mix it up.
Yeah, for sure. So important. Now, that sort of covers off our pre-season from a footballer's perspective, but I want to tap into your coaching knowledge as well before we finish up the episode. So as a coach, what are some maybe tips or tricks that you could share to help keep a coach's players engaged over that off-season break if they're probably inexperienced and don't know how to handle that break? How can you really get engagement from your players?
Obviously, I think you'd probably these days set up sort of online chats, things like that. People can record their scores or their times and things to keep them engaged. I know we've done that before in the academy and me as a coach throughout my journey of giving players challenges. You link them up with another teammate so they can do their running or skills together, just to keep each other sort of going, like a buddy system. There's different ways you can sort of keep them engaged, but at the end of the day, it comes back to the professional. I think we talk about the man in the stand a bit, or the person in the stand, and I think that's so relevant in terms of having time away from the football club or from your program, professional and non-professional. I think that the ones that actually want to do the work will do the work, and I think you sort of there's no no qualms about it, and it's definitely not a surprise when a player comes back in great shape and they have the year they have. So I think that's really important from a coach's point of view to be able to challenge your players, but sometimes too you might be as much as you're trying to sort of lay down the law or the rules. Sometimes I think it's up to them at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good attitude. You want to give them a framework so they've got something there if they're looking for a training session, but you also want to give them the chance to, I guess, source their own sort of variation over the off season. It's always a balancing act, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think also too, what comes with that is the onus of players to actually want to do the work and get themselves in good shape, and coaches not tearing their hair out, the players aren't doing it, micromanaging it. But I think, again, as I said before, I think players are so much better at these days. Yeah,
absolutely. And to wrap things up, Rainsy, I might, in a very broad sense, what are some common mistakes you see, whether it's coaches or players, what are some common mistakes that you see in the off season from anyone, any facet of training or life? What are some common mistakes that you see?
Players for starting, I think we touched about before, just not doing the conditioning element of whether it's skills, gym work, physical stuff, or their game based sort of stuff over the break. I think that's really important to make sure that they're, as I said before, engaged in a sense that they're doing the work, but also too, I've seen some huge mistakes that people just haven't done the work. Simple as that. Coaches, whether they're going too hard with their program too early or not hard at all, and miss out later on down the track. I think that's really important to make sure that you've got a program as a coach that you want to map out from the start of pre-season to the end of pre-season, and how you want to sort of build that, whether you have, again, a bit of the old school theory of the the green, orange, red weeks. So you're having a green as a light week, and orange as a sort of a medium week, and then a really hard week's your red weeks, and sort of that tiered process, a periodic sort of map of your pre-season. So you might want to sort of plan that out. And if you've got a strength conditioning coach, obviously that helps. But if you're a coach on your own, I'll definitely sort of follow that advice about having some sort of different weeks and build up to weeks. And as you do that, you don't want to just have 4 red weeks or 4 green weeks, or sort of 4 orange weeks in a row. You want to be able to sort of mix that up with your conditioning element and your skills. I would say too, now with the team element of pre-season, as you said, the games come out a bit earlier these days, and making sure you're getting that sort of competitive contact stuff on early, but make sure you train everything around your game plan. There's no point doing drills and running sessions, and if you want to be a fitter team, you want to be if you think your team needs to be fitter or better running group, there's no point sort of doing too much in the gym and shorter running spurts. Look at more that sort of speed endurance element in your training, how you want to be able to, if you want to be the best running team, well, maybe you do push the edge of doing more running sessions. If you want to be the strongest team, the most contested team, well, do you do a bit more gym session, a bit more contested drills? So really trying to identify what your weapons are of your team as a coach I'm talking about, and then map that out in your program. And as a player, identify what you want to be as a player. And if you want to be the quickest, the best running player outside, let's say you're an outside winger, well, you're going to focus more on that in your pre-season. There's no point going and lifting too many weights, being a sort of an outside running player. So again, focusing on, we say it all the time, but what you want to be known as, and then go away and train that and map that out in your training program across the summer. Yeah,
for sure. It's a great process, I guess. Identify the goals, which gives you direction, and then come up with your systems and your training sessions that are going to help you move toward that goal. Mate, before we finish up, did you ever train on Christmas morning? I can't remember who told me once, but it might have been Joey Hayes. Used to say train on Christmas morning because you know that all your competition's not, and that used to give me like a little bit of confidence, I guess, knowing that I trained on Christmas. Did you ever?
Yeah, I did. I was actually thinking of that before. It's a bit of an old. I think I actually heard, well, not a cliche, because people actually do use the topic of you train on Christmas morning or New Year's morning, whatever it is, and you get you know that it just gives you that bit more ammo going, okay, I know everyone else has been better, I'm doing it. Yeah, I have done it, to answer your question. Maybe not every Christmas morning, but I think I used to try and do Christmas morning, New Year's he might have given myself New Year's Day off always, but then I used to, later in my career I used to actually get up and actually do something on New Year's morning, knowing like I'd do a hike or something like that with my wife, and knowing to start the year off in a really good direction. I think it's a really good one too. You know, a lot of people, adults, are probably had a big night the night before and getting up and making the most. I think there's something in that. And again, as an athlete, I think training when no one else is training is nothing better at that. But yeah, definitely have picked some days there throughout that Christmas break where I have done it, and I've walked away really confident and sort of keeping that up his sleeve and a bit of ammo.
Yeah, for sure. And that probably brings us full circle, doesn't it? Talking about the mentality of preseason. Are you going into it with the mindset of really not looking forward to the running? I can't wait till this is over so I can get into skills, or are you looking at it as an opportunity? I think if you've got the mentality that preseason or off season is an opportunity, then those little things, training on Christmas morning, or doing a session when, or really searching for resources to improve your game, I think they'll happen naturally if you attack it with the mentality of it's an opportunity, not a burden or something that you're forced to do. I think it all comes back to mentality.
One last one before we go, mate. I think the big one for kids, and I'll just pass on this message, that we stress about so many time trials. Forget about the time trials. Do your best. Run it. You probably went through as a player, mate. I remember Anthony Shaka, a physio. He's still a physio at Richmond. I was sitting in his physio room one morning at Richmond about to run the 10, and he said, "Rainsy, everyone's so stressed about the 10." He said, "Mate, you guys play on 22 games a year on the MCG, averaging 60, 65,000, whatever we used to average at Richmond, and you're stressed about a 4K run." He said, "Mate, if you look at it like that, it's nothing." And I always remember that. I was like, yeah, what do we, because you want to do well and you're testing yourself and all that stuff. But I see kids do it these days. Just do your best. Yeah. If you've done the work, you'll do well. If you're not that great at it, well, you can improve. Go see your coaches, get better at it. But it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I think that's absolute gold, and something that I experienced actually as well. Endurance running was my strength, and I used to, maybe it was a bit of ego, I used to take a lot of pride in finishing top 2 in the 2K time trial. But looking back on it now, I really wish that I'd sort of been happy to finish 10th or 12th or something, and have spent more time working on it, what's actually going to improve my footy, rather than trying to not show off, but rather than trying to prove myself that early in the preseason. I guess it's all good and well to be not a hero. I don't want to paint it like that, but I think you've got to remember that it's a long season.
March champions.
You don't want to peak too early.
The guys that are flying too early, and it's the old saying, March champions. Yeah. You want to be flying in September. So yeah, it's a good point.
And it's an opportunity to set your foundations, not perform. You want to peak, like you said, during September. So use that off season as a chance to build your foundations. We talk about like the pyramid analogy, where if you make your base really wide, then the top of your pyramid is going to be higher. Whereas if you don't spend time making the base of your pyramid wide, you're not going to get as high.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. All right, that brings us to the end of the episode, Rainsy. Thanks for all your expertise. I think there's plenty in there that the listeners can take home and start actioning straight away. Any final words, mate, before we wrap up?
No, thanks, mate. It's a really good topic. I get asked about it a lot, and hopefully we've shared some information there that helps some young footballers, some coaches, and even some parents around the importance of pre-season, why they're so sort of integral to the season ahead, and hopefully you can pick up some little tips there. Brought back a few memories for me, some grueling ones, some really good ones too. So thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks for listening to the One-on-One Football Podcast. If you got something out of today's episode, we'd love it if you could leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to stay updated on special guests, new episodes, and more, please subscribe to the show on your chosen platform. And finally, if you have any questions for Rainsy or myself, or you want to get a particular guest on the show, please reach out. Our email address is podcast@oneonfootball.com.au. Thanks, guys. We'll see you for the next episode.